All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to another week here on Adventures with Sarah. And this week, our theme, as you know, is going to be Florence. And we're doing this Where in the World thing. We're going to keep doing it until we can travel again. So we've got weeks scheduled all the way through September of different destinations that I want to take you to. So virtually this week, I'm going to take you to Florence. It was supposed to be Naples this week, but because of the COVID situation in Italy, they've been changing a lot of things. And the people in Naples that I had lined up can't leave their houses. So we had to flip real quick and reschedule. And I was so pleased that my friends in Florence stepped up to the plate. I just knew they would, because you can always count on a Florentine. So this morning, we have a wonderful guest that I'm so happy to have to introduce you to. In Florence, my friend Antonia Lanza, and she is one of the most historic and venerable tour guides of Florence, but also just an incredibly interesting person. So welcome, Antonia.
My pleasure. Good morning, everybody, and hello to you, Sarah.
So Antonia and I have worked together for many years. Actually, Antonia, you were the very first local guide that I ever met in my tour guiding career. Did you know that?
No, I did not. You never stopped. Well, it's been such a pleasure always working with you, Sarah.
Yeah, well, it was in the year 2000, and I was assisting Ferdy, and he hired you to do the Uffizi for us. And I remember you so well because you showed up with like a straw hat and these beautiful gloves. And I just thought, you look like somebody from like the Grand Tour. like you, and you were so good. I just remember that because that was the very first local guide that I'd ever interacted with. So you were the very first one.
Was it really 21 years ago?
It was.
Tempers fugit.
I know. I think about it sometimes and how quickly all of this time has gone by. I think it's just when you enjoy what you're doing, time just kind of.
Absolutely.
So you've been in Florence for many years, but you're not Italian in origin. You're from, like my dad, Northern Ireland, right?
Well, I'm a mixture of Northern Ireland, English, Scots, and I also have American ancestry. I have a couple of American senators floating around in the background. And in my father's side of the family, and I've got to do a lot of work on it, but there is a possibility of Tuscan ancestry. And I've always felt very much at home here. On the 6th of December, it will be 56 years that I've lived here. I have dual nationality.
Wow. So I know this story already, but I would love for you to tell it to other people. So how did you end up in Florence? Because you've become really part of the fabric of the city. So what brought you to Florence?
Well, I was working in London as an au pair, and my American grandmother had actually come to live in Florence. And she was renting an apartment with a family that my parents knew. In fact, the Countess has known me since I was 4 because we met when I was growing up in Ireland. And they wanted somebody to help with the children. And my uncle said, well, I think my niece might like to come. I've always wanted to come to Florence. There's been something, as I say, in the background. And he rang me up and said, how about working in Florence with this family? And 2 weeks later, I was here. And then my idea was to go around Europe learning languages, maybe Spanish. My French was quite good. I've got to bring that back again. And my feet just got glued to the ground here. And I worked with the family for 6 years. Then I worked actually at Gucci for a couple of years as a saleswoman, which was a fabulous apprenticeship in fashion. It was still owned by the family, and oh my gosh, you really learned about fashion.
So at that time when you worked at Gucci, I imagine you must have worked directly with the family, right?
Well, the family, yes. Aldo Gucci, the old commendatore, they came in every morning. There was Roberto Gucci. And I was not allowed to sell anything for 2 weeks. I had to learn all the different leathers and, all the different things that they had and where they were and so on. And I worked there for a couple of years. But in the meantime, on a blind date, I had met my husband. And we found afterwards that our families had friends in common. I mean, if you put it in a soap opera, nobody would believe it. But you know what, this is stranger than fiction.
Well, I've always thought when you've told me stories about your life that you have a life that needs to be a book. Like you have led one of the most interesting lives of anybody that I know. So tell everybody a little bit about your husband.
Well, he was the son of an ambassador. Sadly, he's no longer with us. This year, on the 21st of May, it will be the 30th anniversary of his passing. His father was the first Italian ambassador to Japan after World War II. So Manfredi, the name of my husband, he lived for a little while in Japan, and then they went to the Argentine and to Brazil. So he didn't want to go into the diplomatic corps, but he spoke 5 languages. So he became a tour guide. And he actually took the exam for the tour guide the year we were married, after we were married. And he was very successful because he spoke beautiful English and French and Portuguese and so on.
Well, actually, I didn't know that part of the story. I didn't realize that he was a tour guide.
Yeah, because he spoke all these languages. What was he going to do with it?
Yeah.
So he did. And he also worked sometimes as a translator. And then I was persuaded to sort of go into tourism. And I had 2 baptisms of fire because I was working at the convention center. And a friend had said, I'm working there. Why don't you come and give me a hand? And I said, well, you know, I've never done anything like you. So it's simple. You'll be with me at the front desk and you give out maps to the ladies. And she laughed and said, well, you work there. You said you'll show them where Gucci is and, you know, how to go here, there and everywhere. And then you help get people on the buses to go around the city. And I was doing that. And all of a sudden there was somebody who should have turned up for the bus. They couldn't find her. So I had to take them around, turning them over to a local guide. And then the second time I was already studying for the guides exam. They hadn't had an exam for 10 years. They ended up by being 2,000 of us taking this exam. It's the most terrifying thing I've ever done in my life. And there was a huge convention. We had 20 buses, and you know how many people there are on a bus, Sarah. These were packed like sardines. There were 50 people per bus. I knew the guides. I'm standing next to the director of the company and saying, oh, this is so-and-so, and he speaks Spanish with me. He goes on bus number 3, and 20 buses. Bus number 19, it was French and German or something, said, yes, you go there. And then we stood around and we waited. And where was the guide? Now, this is before cell phones. And we waited and we waited. And this gentleman said to me, Antonia, I'm going to ask you a big favor. And I thought, oh gosh, he's going to make me walk all the way back to the office to see if this person who hasn't arrived is waiting there. So I said, fine. He said, would you take the people around as a guide? And I said, I'm not a guide yet. And he said, you know more about Florence than they do. I had my foot on the running board of the bus. If he'd asked me 10 minutes earlier, I would have fainted from horror at his feet. Yeah, I mean, he just sort of gave me the microphone and said, get on with it.
Yeah, well,
so I did. I mean,
you know, same thing kind of happened to me too, so.
Welcome to
yeah, it kind of is what it is.
I managed to get through the guides exam, and here I am.
And you are absolutely magnificent at what you do. So if we can just go a little bit back into your personal story, one of the most affecting things I think that happened to you when you were younger was the flood. And you were an au pair at that time, right? The
family has a beautiful wine farm. I'm still very much in touch with the family, and I've taken clients to this farm. The villa dates back to the 1500s. And they all speak perfect English, not through me. They already spoke very good English, the children. The children are now in their 50s. And we had terrible storms. And Grevi in Chianti is this lovely town. They had a market every Saturday. And I'd saved my pennies and I'd bought a transistor radio. And I had new batteries in my radio. And the lady of the house said, oh, bother, my batteries have almost gone. She said, well, it doesn't matter. On Saturday, we're going into the local town, to Grevy. And it rained and it rained and it rained. And the next morning, I heard a strange noise. And I thought, my goodness, now there's a wind. I wonder what's going on. And the gamekeeper's wife, whose name was Dina, came in and said, oh, Signorina, something terrible. The local river, which is the Greve River, which dries up in the summer. She said it swept away part of the avenue. This avenue had been built in the 1930s, had been built up, and it had cypress trees on either side. And I thought, well, yeah, little sort of, there was a huge gap. I've got photographs of it. And Florence was unrecognizable. And I actually have my diary from that. I don't write in my diaries every day, but I've got diaries going back to when I was 16, I think. And apparently I went down to Florence and I didn't speak for 2 days. When I came back, I was so shocked.
Wow.
Florence was unrecognizable.
Wow.
And it's 20 feet of water going at 40 miles an hour through the streets of Florence. But the worst thing was then central heating was diesel oil and the water tanks burst. And we had oil on top of the water and nobody could light even a candle because they were afraid that the city would burn on top of the water.
Wow, and that was November, so it was freezing.
We talk about the city, but in the countryside, the devastation was equal, not for works of art, but hundreds of thousands of heads of cattle died.
Wow.
And people on roofs for 3 days before they were rescued. And yeah. I've got my there. And this family was a very old and illustrious Florentine family. They have their family archives. Italy has a lot of family archives, which are absolutely fascinating. But they were brought up, they were on parchment, on vellum. And we were out in the country with hose pipes and camel hair brushes, brushing off the mud. And then they got what is called, it's blue mold, and it's cobalt blue. It smells absolutely awful. And the only way you could get rid of it was with thymol and alcohol, which of course is very poisonous, those two. And the state took over the books because people had to wear rather what they're wearing now in the COVID, this PPE, so that they wouldn't die from the fumes. But I've got photographs of that as well. Wow. And every so often the Count would say, would you like to know what they were eating for Easter in 1624 or something? And he would read it. And it was fascinating. It's the same thing we have here now.
Wow.
You know, we keep our traditions, don't we?
Yeah, well, you know, and that flood was such an important part of the city's history. And a lot of people maybe don't know much about it. It was 1966, right?
November 4th, 1966, we had the 50th anniversary of it. A couple of years ago, I was asked to give a couple of lectures, one to school children in the international school. And that Sunday, it poured with rain. I should have it on my Facebook page somewhere. I was on Ponte Santa Trinita, filming and praying and saying, please, God, not another flood. I was going home on a bus. We were stopped by the police. They wouldn't let us go across the bridge because they were afraid it was going to collapse.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. So, you know, but Florence at the moment is empty. She's like a sleeping beauty and she's waiting for her prince to come, which of course are our lovely visitors, to kiss her and wake her up again. There's a lot of restoration work going on.
You had told me that yesterday when we talked. So tell me a little bit about that, because I'm curious. I was thinking about that. Well, what an opportunity actually when there's no travelers.
Well, the government has also given people special financial help to restore buildings, but the fine arts, the Belle Arti, and also the cathedral, they apparently have restored the mosaics inside the baptistry. The only thing is I cannot get into any museum because they're all closed.
Yeah. I
can go to the cathedral for mass.
Oh, they are actually having masses in person then.
Oh yes, we can go to mass, but there's a curfew at 10 o'clock in the evening.
Yeah.
So the midnight mass this year will probably be about sort of 8 in the evening or even earlier. Is that your kitty cat?
Sorry,
Oh,
Opal is, she's looking for attention. That's all the weird noise you guys keep hearing in the background. So I'm going to let Opal say hello. This is our kitten, Opal. Say hello, Opal. And then Opal is going to go. Yeah, she's going to be taken away by her handler. Here you go.
She's going to have Fred.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's really interesting. So what other things are being restored right now? So the baptistry mosaics, and is there any other work?
A lot of the buildings are being restored, you know, private buildings. And I believe they've done a lot of work in the Uffizi, which I haven't, of course, been able to see. I don't know about Prato. I want to do a program on Prato. I don't know if you, can you see it? This is the Museo del Tessuto di Prato.
Yes, yeah, and for people who don't know Antonia, she has a passion for the fabrics of the Renaissance, so.
Well, this is the donations, 30 years of donation, and they have the most amazing collection in this museum of textiles. It's a teaching museum. So there are boxes on the wall, and you can feel the difference between cashmere, mohair, cotton, all the different natural and man-made fibers. And recently they had a wonderful exhibition. You know, there's a new film out on Pinocchio.
No, I hadn't heard about that.
Yeah, it's Italian. Benini is the one who made La Vita è Bella, Life is Beautiful. Yeah. Roberto Benini, he is Geppetto. I haven't been able to see it because you remember last year I fell over and broke my leg, which is a very stupid thing to do. But I managed to get, before I did, to the museum with some clients. They had all the costumes for the film, and those costumes have been put up for an Oscar.
Oh, wow.
This year. They are divine.
Oh, that's great.
I fell in love with them, and they do things like that. And they've also got cupboards where you can try things on. I was there with a group of students, and a friend of mine, American friend, who's a university professor, and one young man was very interested. He came with us because she'd never seen it. And he was very interested in style. And there was a cupboard, and he was trying on the clothes, and he looked great in them. One was a tweed coat of the 1950s, and he looked absolutely amazing in it. So people can go in and look, and there's a wonderful story of how they make the clothes there. It goes back to the Middle Ages and how they were brought over the mountains, and, you know, and they've also got another wonderful, wonderful cathedral with frescoes by Filippo Lippi. And it's now a copy on the outside, but the original still exists, is an exterior pulpit by none less than Donatello.
Oh, he's my favorite. I always tell all my travelers that if I could choose one artist of all of the Renaissance, that would be my choice.
Well, the putti are very similar to the ones you find in the Cathedral Museum here on the Singing Gallery. And they're going from sacred to profane, but also absolutely delicious. There is Mattioli, I think they're called. These are the people who make the biscotti di Prato. And you walk in that shop and you can buy them. And they're reproducing again the old biscuit boxes, which is like a hat box. And they're making the old cakes and the biscuit. Prato is a place to spend a day.
And we're going to do that, aren't we? You and I.
Good. You take a train. We've got trains that take 25 minutes, so you become a real Florentine with me, a real Tuscan. And we walk around, and there might even be a local market. And there's the castle of the emperor as well. There's also a church designed for Lorenzo of Medici on the site of a miraculous happening, of course. But it's just a lovely town to walk around.
Well, and this is a fun time to just interject that a little surprise for people watching, which is that I haven't announced my tour schedules for next year, but I will reveal to you that I am going to work with Antonia and with the other guests I'm going to have this week on a 1-week tour of Florence, staycation style. And Antonia is going to be, of course, one of our guides. So that will be up for sale probably in April. So if you're interested in traveling with me for a whole week, Antonia, you and I have talked about taking people out to Prato for probably a decade.
About time we did, I think.
Yeah. So I think it is about time that we do that. So just kind of going back, it's so interesting that Prato is so famous for all of the textiles and all of that. But there's a reason, right? That Florence in general was about textiles. I think in history we relate them, the whole city of Florence, wealth off of banking. But they're intertwined. The banking and the fabric are intertwined, right?
Yeah, in a certain way, yes. The thing is that, of course, the weaving here in Florence, except for the famous silk factory, which was founded in the 1780s and still goes on here in Florence, Settificio Fiorentino, which is amazingly expensive to get into for the simple reason when you go in, they have to stop the looms because the noise is deafening, and also the shuttles going back and forth. It's all hand done. And they're dangerous, the shuttles going back and forth, but they are spinning the silk on a copy of a machine designed by who else but Leonardo da Vinci. And it is absolutely extraordinary what they do. That is a place when people really say, well, why not? When are we ever going to be in Florence again to go and see this Settificio? We can go to the shop because you can see these incredible materials. And they're making the same taffetas. And I think a lot of the colors are still vegetable colors that you see in the paintings by Botticelli, by Michelangelo and his famous Doni Tondo, and so on and so forth. And they have these incredible taffetas, but they are innovators. They also make new things as well. The last time I was there, they had made a special taffeta for a gentleman who obviously had a couple of pennies in his bank account because he had a yacht and he wanted some taffeta for the pillows or the cushions on the yacht, which would look like the sea. So they wove this turquoise and blue threads with silver, and it looks like the surface of the sea.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what I saw it.
Yeah, well, the textile industry, I just think is something that we don't talk about enough. I talk about it a lot on my tours just because I have a particular passion for fashion and I have a real interest in that. But, you know, in the past, if you go back to Renaissance times, you didn't drive a Mercedes to show how wealthy you were. You dressed like the clothing you had and the fabrics that you wore showed off your social status in a way that maybe you have a Rolex today to do the same thing. But Florence is a great place to discover that kind of stuff, right? Also the museum at the Palazzo Pitti, right?
Yeah, and my mother's wedding dress is actually in that museum.
What?
Yeah.
Wait, why? How?
Oh, my mother's wedding dress was made by Norman Hartnell, who made the Queen's coronation dress and her wedding dress. And my mother's wedding dress was made by him. Mummy was smaller than myself and my sister, so we couldn't fit in it. And she didn't know what to do with it. And she'd taken it to a very well-known then, we're talking now over 30 years ago. She had taken it to a very well-known auction house who turned their noses up at it and said, oh, much too modern. We don't sell those sort of things. Now I should think they're kicking themselves. And I said, Mummy, would you consider giving it to the Costume Museum in Palazzo Pitti? So she said, well, yes, why not? And Manfredi and I bought the dress out and I telephoned the people there. They said, will we bring it in? And I did. It's dead here. It's embroidered in pearls and bugle beads, Venetian bugle beads on a silver and white background. And they opened the box and there was dead silence. And Manfredi and I looked at each other and we both thought, oh no, we're going to have to take it back to England. And then one of the ladies said, I have never seen anything so beautiful.
Wow.
She said, and they actually had an exhibition of wedding dresses and that was the centerpiece. I've got the little booklet on it. And then it came out in another one as well. And I didn't know it was even on show. And somebody said, I've just seen your mother's wedding dress. And I said, oh, did you buy the book? And they looked at me and they said, no, in the museum. And I said, what? So that's no. So there's a bit of my family over here in a way.
That is so cool. I never knew that. You know, every time I talk to you, you tell me another fascinating story. I'm telling you, one day I'm just going to start recording all of our conversations because it's like a history book somehow. So one of the things I love when we're in the Uffizi Gallery is how you look at the paintings, and you talk a lot about symbolism, but one of the things I love is also how you relate to the textiles. And I remember one of the first tours I did with you in the Uffizi, we stood in front of an international Gothic period painting and didn't talk about what was happening in the painting, but just about the textiles and the patterns in the textiles and what that all meant. So that's obviously a point of interest for you.
Absolutely, because also the patterns, especially sometimes in religious paintings, can also have symbolism. But going back to the showing your wealth with the textiles, very often the textile of a dress could be worth more than the jewels worn with it. Cloth of gold, for example.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing.
And people at that time didn't have, you know, like I walk into my walk-in closet and I've got, you know, probably 40 dresses hanging in my closet. But most people at that time, even wealthy people, only had maybe 2 or 3 outfits, right? And they'd kind of change them up, change the sleeves. And I love looking at those details. I think you pointed that out in a painting once about how the bodices were separate.
Sleeves every day. Then you had sleeves apparently, but were part of your dowry.
Just the sleeves, only the sleeves.
But because they could be embroidered with precious stones. It's something which, of course, they're still doing in India today. It's men, apparently, who do the embroidery, and they embroider with diamonds.
Wow.
Wow. So, you know, the very, 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 very wealthy bride is sort of, I would imagine it weighs a ton, but you're sort of in your wonderful sari with diamonds all over it, and maybe an occasional ruby or emerald just sort of thrown in for a bit of color.
Wow.
But there was an extraordinary thing on the BBC the other day about this very, very fine muslin, which they're trying to remake because the thread count was huge, and it was transparent.
Transparent, but a huge thread count. So it had to be super fine thread.
Super fine. It was a very special kind of cotton. And that was worn by the ladies in the 1700s. So they literally, everything could be seen. And the girls wore it, and the gentlemen ogled it. And people said, look at you, you're nude. They said, no, I'm not. I've got 4 layers of it. But it was completely transparent.
Wow. Huh.
Again, because I'll send it to you on email.
Yeah, please do. One of the stories, you'll have to tell me the story because I forget, but there was the Eleonora da Toledo painting in the Uffizi. She's featured in this incredible gown. They have that, don't they? They found that gown, right?
They have something similar. Some people say that gown was made up by Bronzino. But what they do in the Pitti Palace collection is the gown she was buried in. Now, she suffered from tuberculosis, as you know, and you would think the wealth, you know, if a gown got stained or was too short or too long, well, you'd have another one made, wouldn't you? No. And you can see on the hem where it had been let out or taken up as she got thinner and thinner. And she was buried very quickly because they thought it might be an infectious disease, and her stockings were inside out. They've also got the cloak which belonged to her husband, Cosimo, and one of the doublets belonging, I think it's to Don Garcia. Now, when they found it, there were strips of ribbon around about sort of an inch, less than an inch wide. I mean, you and I would have looked at it and said, where's the nearest trash can? And incredible people in the costume museum reconstructed it from those bits. Now you can look at Eleonora, you can look at Cosimo, you can look at the children in the painting. But to my mind, when you stand in front of the clothes, it really hits you that these were living people. They breathed, they laughed, they cried like you and I.
And that's what I love so much about the Textile Museum. And that's why I love this as a conversation today, because I don't know why it is. I think it's because I was a seamstress in college and I love to sew. But for me, when I see like the Victoria and Albert Museum, it's the same way.
Yeah.
I am just absolutely drawn to costume museums because you do feel like you have that kind of connection to the people. There's something tangible that you can see and you can connect to those historical characters.
I think it's in a certain way, maybe they have an energy of their own.
Yeah.
In a way, it's like Savonarola's cloak in the St. Mark's Museum. You realize that that was worn by a man who was very controversial in his time, but he actually wore that. He wore it walking around Florence. The same way as you go to Jerusalem and you walk in the steps of where Christ walked.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting. I've never really put it together in my own mind why I'm so drawn to the textiles and the conversations you and I've had about textiles and the costume museums, but I really do feel like that's what it is. It feels like the tangible link between us and historical characters, you know.
I have been, there's a cope, I don't think it's used anymore, and sadly the priest died very young, which was a skirt which belonged to Catherine of Aragon.
Wow.
And I want to try and do some, I promised the priest I would do some research on it. This was about getting on OFO, I suppose about 25, 26 years ago. I didn't have a computer then. And very sadly, he died from a heart attack. He was the most delightful person. But I got the photographs of the selvage edge. And I think the material may have come from Florence or Prato.
Oh. And you could probably identify that, I imagine, right?
No, I would need help from somebody. But last year in the Bargello Museum, for example, we had the most extraordinary exhibition on textiles which had been embroidered by women for the synagogues here.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely incredible.
Well, this, like I said, it's so interesting because I really do feel like people misunderstand Florence and that they think it was just a banking city, but the fabric industry actually predates the banking industry. Is that, am I correct in that?
That brought us wealth after the Great Plague of 1348, because in 1252, we had minted the first golden florin, which was 23 karat gold. So we were bankers. But with that, a huge amount of good was done. And charity. The charitable institutions here are incredible. The first orphanage, I'm doing some studies on it. The first orphanage, I believe, was founded by one of the popes in Rome. Because you got something like, I think it was 60 to 80,000 children dying per year because they were abandoned. Mostly girls, of course, left on riverbanks. And the church was horrified by this. Think of Romulus and Remus.
Yeah.
They were abandoned, but they were found by the she-wolf. And we have the Ospedale degli Innocenti here, the Hospice of the Innocence, which was actually built with money from the Silk Guild. And one is Francesco d'Attini, Prato. And he did not have a child by his wife. He had been a fostered child, apparently. I must do more study on him. There's the famous book by Ari Sorigo called The Merchant of Prato, and we can visit his house when we go there. And he had a daughter by the serving girl. Now, you would have thought that the wife had said, right, out, both of them. They adopted the child as theirs.
Wow.
I think it's the most heartwarming story. And when he died, he left money to help build the Ospedale degli Innocenti, which is no longer where people leave children, but they still have schools there for children from underprivileged parents.
Yeah, so those of you who don't know the Hospital of the Innocents, you may have seen it if you've been in Florence, but what it's really famous for is the revolving door, right?
Yeah.
Where you could go and you could take a baby, you'd open the door, Put the baby in like a book return, right?
Which no longer exists. But of course, it's one of the finest works by Filippo Brunelleschi, and he is building that at the same time he's building the dome on the cathedral. So you would come down Via dei Servi, which is the Servites of Mary, a monastic order founded in the 1200s, and you get to the square, and it was not unlike the perfect ideal of a Renaissance city.
Yeah, well, and that square, I think, is one of the most beautiful and underappreciated squares, because most people, it's just a little bit outside of the range that most tourists go.
But also the Church of Santissima Annunziata, you know, the silver altar, that has been cleaned, Sarah. It is breathtaking. All the silver's been cleaned.
Wonderful.
Because Medici, who had that made, Cosimo the Elder. And you see, not brightly shining like we have on our flatware, but the original color is silver, so not unlike my flask, which is stainless steel.
Today, maybe they'd make a stainless steel altar if maybe Gucci donated one. I don't know, but
but no, they probably, well, maybe you could have I'm sure that there exists a brushed silver thermos. I do know a wonderful shop, Brandi Marti. It's run by, he was a very famous silversmith, died young again. I knew him quite well. And we went to visit his workshop once, and one of the people who was taking us around said, "We're making a silver bath." And I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "Yeah, bathtub in silver." I said, "You mean it's silver plated?" He said, "No, somebody's ordered a solid silver bath." And the only thing I could think to say was, "Well, I'm very glad I don't have to clean it." Imagine a silver bathtub.
No, that would be terrible. How cold too.
But his granddaughter, she is a silversmith, and there's a gorgeous shop in Florence. She does the most beautiful work and gorgeous jewelry, really wearable jewelry, you know, sort of cuffs and beautiful necklaces and things like that.
Wow. You have met so many interesting people in your life, especially in your guiding. I was just wondering who are the most interesting people that you have met in your years working as a guide?
Well, I don't sort of like, in a way, saying who I've guided, but I have met very, very interesting people.
Okay. I respect that. That's fine.
And trumpet, but well, I can tell two of the people, and one was Tony Blair and his family, and I've guided them 3 times.
Wow.
And prove it. They were lovely. They were absolutely delightful. And another was Shimon Peres, who was, again, the most delightful gentleman.
So what did they want to see? Was it the Uffizi that you took them to?
The program was made out. When you guide people like this, you don't know who you're guiding till the last minute, quite literally. And the security is phenomenal. It's quite funny, because with one of these people, I was walking down the street, and it looked as like a youngish person. I was a few years younger then, with this elderly gentleman, and we were chatting. And we had people around us who looked like part of the family. They were all armed to the teeth. They were in plain clothes, ours and theirs. And as we walked into one, I think it was the Uffizi Museum, one of ours said to the custodian, "The people behind me have got pistols. Don't throw hysterics. It's all legal."
Yeah. So in all these years that you've been guiding, I'm sure you have a favorite thing. I know in Florence what my favorite thing to show people is. I'm very interested in urban development because I have an architecture background. Yeah. But if, most people ask for the Duomo and the Uffizi. And I know most guides, even if they love doing that stuff, have something special that they like to share. What is your favorite thing that you like to share?
San Miniato al Monte, the Benedictine monastery, because I know the abbot there, who's the most delightful person. I have my spiritual advisor there, and the view is amazing. It's the view I sent you the other day, Sarah. Do you remember I said this is a photograph of my favorite city, which of course is Florence. And then about 4 years ago now, it was printed. It hasn't been translated into English yet, unfortunately. But I and 13 other guides, we wrote on Firenze Novecento, Florence in the 1900s. Now, where I live is a district that was built up in the 1900s, badly bombed by the Allies during World War II in 1943. In fact, the building I live in, half of it went because they were trying to get at the railway line and they missed. They actually killed 215 civilians. But there are some beautiful Art Nouveau houses around here. And in another place, there's a very famous glass works where they've restored the wonderful stained glass windows in the Duomo, but you can actually visit their workshop where you used to. And they do the most modern things as well as they copy things. Another favorite thing of mine, apart from San Miniato, is the little church of Santa Felicita and the deposition by Pontormo.
I think I know that. Where is that at?
It's just off Ponte Vecchio. The next time you come, you and I will go there. It is the most extraordinary deposition, and there's also an Annunciation. And it is the Capone Chapel. It was made by Capone.
The Vasari corridor goes through?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I have been in there, but only maybe once or twice. So yeah, that
I don't think you've seen the deposition since it's been cleaned and since they discovered in the little dome of the chapel where there were paintings by Bronzino and Pontormo. They're still the four evangelists. But the top of the cupola went when Vasari went through there. But they cleaned it and they found grisaille paintings from the 1700s.
Wow.
So that's it. This is my Florence, and poking around in the back streets and walking up to the Belvedere Fortress and walking up steep hills and things like that, which I love doing, and down to the San Niccolò district and looking at the old walls, which sadly came down in the 1800s when Florence was capital. And there's another, which is fantastic, which is the English cemetery. Now, it belongs to the Swiss evangelical. The custodian there is a very dear friend of mine. She's a nun, Sister Julia Bolton, who is an expert on the Brownings and on Dante. She's a Dantista. She's 84. She had a horrible fall in the garden, broke her ribs and her arm, but seems to be mending well. And in that cemetery, you have the tomb of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, some of the people who worked against slavery. Great intellectuals here, because what we mustn't forget is how many writers have been here, English and American. Henry James, Nathaniel Hawthorne, who went up to live in the hills. He said, I can't stand the mosquitoes in Florence. I agree with him. D.H. Lawrence wrote his very naughty book, Lady Chatterley's Lover, here at Scandicci.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Huh. I'm trying to find where the villa is.
Well, and you know, one of the things that made me fall in love with Florence at first was when I was a romantic teenager. I read the E.M. Forster novels, of course. So Where Angels Fear to Tread in a Room with a View. And boy, that whole Grand Tour era, some of it is not great. The British perspective from the 19th century on Italians is a little bit outdated, but what's beautiful about that, and I think this is what is inspiring me to want to do kind of staycation stuff in the future, was just the fact that people, they stayed and they soaked in the culture, because as you're just reciting all these things that you can do, there's so much to see in Florence. It's incredible, right?
Yeah, and one of the things I love doing with people, and I've done it, they absolutely love it, is Florence by night. Yeah.
What do you see at night? What do you like to do?
Well, just, you go to the Uffizi because hopefully in the summer they'll be open again till 10 in the evening. So you go there and maybe before you see the sunset. And then they have a few minutes maybe to sort of pick up a snack or something. And then you walk over Ponte Vecchio and you go down the little side streets and you see the Florentines. You get the feel of the city. And another thing is going down the little side streets and keeping away from the crowds And I often say to people, because you know better than I do, what main streets can be like at times, but you go down some of the little side streets and you poke into or look at shops, and the artisan very often will say, come in. I know a frame maker near Santo Spirito. And my two clients who were with me, they said, well, it's very kind of him. We don't want to disturb him. And I said, he really means it. He would be very offended if you didn't. And I was translating, and he was showing them how he carved the wooden frames.
Yeah.
This is what I do. I am an artisan. And if you take people down the side streets, as you know, I mean, I've said to people very often, you know, at the end of a tour, I said, you see, we don't really find all those many people. I said, you know, if people, friends of yours said, oh, well, Florence was very crowded. If I hadn't taken you down the busy streets, you would have said, nonsense. We were with our guide for 3 hours and we just saw Florentines on the street. And that's my Florence.
Well, and I think that's what makes you one of the most masterful guides that I've seen, is that I feel like after I spend time with you, or my, you know, our group has spent time with you, it's not just, let's see those things that people want to check the box to. It's how do we think about the city? Where can we see the real city? And also the historic. I love when you do the Palazzo Davanzati tour as well, because that's another one of those things where you feel connected to the people of the past.
And what I love doing sometimes is doing Palazzo Davanzati and then taking people or somewhere in the Uffizi as well. I try and make a sort of a fil rouge, a red line. You do Palazzo Davanzati, then you go to the Uffizi, and as we walk out the last rooms where you've got the paintings of still life, and you show them the game birds hanging up and the bread and the cheese and flasks of wine. And then next day you just walk off to the main market, or even the Sant'Ambrogio market, which is near me. And you have the outside stalls and you get the smells of the food and people chit-chatting. And very often I just stand there while two people are sort of having a good gossip, two stall holders. And then you go inside and you see the butchers, you see the fishmonger. There's somebody who's been there for years and years and does the most amazing food. And it's local food, and it's really good because the local people in the market eat it. And you do not want to serve a dish of pasta which has been overcooked, because it'll be around that market quicker than you care to even think of. The little antique market now, the Mercato dei Pulci, flea market as they call it, but it's now near there, and they've got stalls, and I've got a friend who's got a stall there, and they have lovely things.
Yeah, and that's a really fun area too. A lot of people don't make it down to Sant'Ambrogio. It's very easygoing.
That's very,
yeah.
Very. And there's Fabio Picchi, who's got a very famous restaurant there. His wife is also a famous actress, but he makes bread from all the old grains. And the other day I was walking around a side street and my nose started twitching, and I thought, oh, there's somebody making fresh bread. And there was his bakery with the door open. And the people working there were all immigrants, because we have a lot of people who emigrate here, and they get their work permit. And, you know, I think Fabio is one of the people who gives these people work. And there they were, taking out these wonderful loaves of bread from the oven and putting them in big baskets.
Wow.
And, you know, not the industrial bread. This is proper bread.
Yeah, so I mean, you can walk around the city today in 2021 and you can really still feel what it was like 500 years ago, right?
I think we're going back to it again, because there seems to be quite a lot of people now going back to organic farming, and a lot of young people want to go back to the countryside. They're specialized schools, they're like agricultural universities. But some of these people say, I don't want to live in a city anymore. And, you know, I'm now 20 or 23, I've got a girlfriend, and who wants to bring up kids in a city with all the air pollution? Mind you, we're much less polluted now that we've got the tram in, and they're going to put in another one, but there's still a lot of traffic.
Yeah.
And these people
Oh, I was going to say, so speaking of that the tram and the changes, I mean, now we have a pedestrian zone, which for me seems like that was just last year that they put in the pedestrian zone, but I
Oh,
know
God.
it's been what, a decade now probably, but I still get afraid walking around the Duomo because I feel like I'm going to get hit by a bus. But you've seen a lot of changes since you moved 58 years ago to Florence. What are some of the most remarkable changes that you can think
Well,
of? What are the things that impress you the most?
50 years ago in the Signoria Square on Friday morning, there would be men in coats and hats, trilby hats or pork pie hats. And you'd see them chatting and talking and shake hands. And these were the farm managers. And you knew when they shook hands that they'd sold wine or oil, or it was word of mouth, it was on trust. And traffic going through Piazza della Signoria. And I remember some years ago, they're bringing out the old postcards again, the black and white postcards. And I was walking past a shop and there was some there and I said, oh, that's a very old photograph. I said, that's when they had traffic in the Signoria Square. And a voice in the back of my mind said, careful, dear, you remember that. You're talking to a dinosaur, remember. But the traffic out of Via Calzaioli from the Signoria Square to the Cathedral Square, the traffic going through Piazza della Repubblica. I remember the number 6 bus going through Piazza della Repubblica. They had 2 flower beds. They had magnolia trees on either side. And they had phone boxes with a token.
Wow. I remember the Gettone. I can remember that. I'm a dinosaur enough to remember the day when you had to have the sack of Gettone with the little slot in it to put and plonk into
and
the.
It went ping, 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 and then one got stuck, and you sort of banged the box.
Yeah. Oh, I remember that. Yeah. When I was studying in college, more than 25 years ago, I remember doing that, just like having that bag full of the tokens and plonking them in to try and keep on the phone with my parents. Wow.
The little cards, which you would have as well.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I feel like Italy, even in the 90s when I was living in Italy, it just felt like it was another time. It didn't feel like the same timeline as the United States. So, I mean, even in the last 20 years, there's been a huge change just in terms of, I think, probably quality of life, but just the way people work and do things now. And I imagine in the 60s, it was even more so. So kind of in the 60s for somebody coming there for the first time, it was probably more like something like in the 1930s, right? I would imagine.
That I'm not quite sure, but the thing is, in the center, there were many more little food shops. We've now got the big industry in here, and things have become homogenized. Because in Via Por Santa Maria, Via Cimatori, there was a very famous grocery store where I used to go. A lot of the big shops sadly have closed down. And where I live now, Paolo had been running the cafe for 30 years and the owners are very foolish. They haven't renewed his contract, so he's left. And that cafe on the corner would have celebrated its 100th anniversary this year. And it was a meeting place of this district, which goes back to the 1800s. Beyond where I live, up to the 1960s, a lot of it was countryside. We have a sports stadium, which is a national monument, soccer stadium. In the 1960s, they built swimming pools. They built a sports hall, which is now named after Nelson Mandela. And that is where they are actually vaccinating people for COVID, one of the vaccinations.
Wow.
But as I said, this was built up in the 1950s and 60s. When we bought the apartment I now live in the 1980s, it was a quiet residential area. There were big apartments because they were family apartments. And the very nice restaurant underneath me, which actually has gone back to its old name, it's closed at the moment, but it's had some very strange people who were running it. And now they've brought it back to what it was, a Trattoria Ada, because there was a Signora Ada who ran it in the early 1900s. And you get all the families going there. And on Sundays, there was Granny and Granddad and the in-laws and their children and so on. They've all moved out to various places. And these big apartments, we're talking 120, 150 square meters, are being sold off and turned into offices because we're outside the city centre. So this district is changing a lot.
Yeah. Well, and also I imagine that COVID is changing a lot of things. So how has it been to live in, I mean, I saw you in September. So I think September was not as weird as now. So I imagine it must be really strange to live in a city that is so quiet.
You have to get used to it. In the winter, when I was allowed, when we were still in red zone, but I was allowed to go to the bank in the city centre. And I walked through Florence about 10:30 in the morning. There wasn't anybody there. We're talking about, it must have been April last year. And I got to the Cathedral Square and I wept because the city was silent. Beautifully clean, all the flowers were in the flower pot. And even now, there are more people walking around. I get very cross with the people who will not wear masks. But it would be nice, it would be wonderful having our visitors back again. That's what we're all looking forward to, but not these huge groups, which you and I remember, where you literally couldn't move in the Uffizi. And the authorities have realized this, which is good.
Really? So what's going to change? Do you have any ideas?
Well, Airbnb, a lot of it, because a lot of houses were being sold. Now, as you know, Airbnb, I believe you can only rent out 3 times a year. That's the sort of law.
Oh, is that new?
1 room. I think that was in the original contracts. You could only do it for sort of a week, but 3 times in a year. And they suddenly found that people were buying up whole buildings.
Yeah.
And it's caused a lot of problems. It means that people can't find places to live in the city centre. Prices have skyrocketed. And recently we've had a big problem. It's on the newspaper today, that these young idiots book an Airbnb for a couple of days and they have rowdy parties, which is completely against the law. And the Carabinieri are called and these young people get very big fines, which I think is wrong. I don't think they ought to give them fines. I think they just say to them, we'll give you PPE and you go and work in the hospitals. That might change their minds.
Yeah.
You know, crime, as they said in one of Gilbert and Sullivan's operas.
Yeah, I was on in a panel a few months ago with the Florentine Tourism Board, and that it was just a discussion about like what is the future of the city with relationship to tourism, and that was the #1 concern above all. I mean, mass tourism, groups that were too big, all of that was bad, but what everybody said was that the biggest impact, negative impact on the city has been Airbnb.
Yeah, and I think with me in the Uffizis, Sarah, when I've been literally pushed aside by somebody taking a selfie and nearly knocked over, which is quite, when you're explaining something and somebody suddenly pushes you, you know, because the first thing is, oh my gosh, I've got somebody behind me who's felt ill and is collapsing. And no, it's somebody who wants to take a photograph of themselves in front of Botticelli's Venus, and they're not even looking at the painting.
Well, and this is where I think that this whole COVID thing could end up being a good thing for some of the cities like Florence in particular, because maybe the Uffizi will realize they need to reduce the number.
They have, because Dr. Schmidt, he's really good as a director. He really is.
Good, yeah. Yeah, I'm hoping that they reduce the number of people and force groups to be much smaller. And, you know, my philosophy, as we talked about yesterday, is that I think people, and this was the other thing that came from this conversation I've been having all over Italy with people who are guides or hotel owners or whatever, is they just want people to stay longer. Like, don't be in such a rush. And so that is what I'm working on with you and with a few other people, is we're going to try to change. I mean, I'm only one person, but
I've had, you know, I guide for different companies, and very often I've had people say to me, you know, it's so frustrating. We've only got a day and a half in Florence. I wish we had 3 or 4 days. I would love to be able to see more of the city.
Yeah.
You know, and you can't do Florence, or let's say they start in Venice and then they go to Verona and then they pass through Bologna and then they come to Florence and then they go to Orvieto, then they go to Rome and then they go down to Naples in 2 weeks. It doesn't make sense. Or even 12 days.
Yeah.
So the only thing I really remember is they're getting up at 5:30 to be on the bus by 7:30.
Well, and I think when you have a day and a half in Florence, you're seeing the worst of Florence. You're not seeing the best of Florence. You're seeing the things that are the most crowded. You're seeing the things that just, you don't get to take that long walk and see the artisans and eat that wonderful little sandwich with the glass of wine on the street and just be a part of it,
Walk past the little coffee shop, not the big one on the street, round the little coffee shop or the little coffee shops that I know. There's one near the Church of San Lorenzo, actually. And you go in there and you get a lovely welcome and you smell the coffee. And there are a couple of people there on a table chatting away, and it's, even though it's near the Church of San Lorenzo, it's been there for some time. And I walked past the other day and I said, oh, am I glad to see you're still open? We've had a lot of places have closed. A lot of places closed. Now, I think some of them were people who were being a little bit too clever, maybe taking out loans that they shouldn't have taken out. But we have had some of the old restaurants closing because the owners have said, I'm 65, I'm 68, and I'm just not battling anymore.
Yeah.
And again, we're back to the owners of buildings being greedy and saying, I'm not going to take the rent down, which is silly because an empty building dies.
And I have to wonder if restaurants are going to be a little bit more careful about specifically catering to tourism in the future. Because, those are usually the worst restaurants anyways, the ones that specifically cater to tourists. But that seems to be a lesson that I'm hearing from people that own restaurants, is that relying too much on foreigners is not a good strategy.
Yes, because they are cooking for the foreigners' taste. They're not cooking for the Italian taste. And people who want real Italian food are not getting it.
Yeah.
Because the tourist menu is spaghetti al pomodoro, roast chicken with salad and and French fries, and then ice cream with maybe something cut over it or and then coffee. And that is sort of almost it's not a school menu, but that's the sort of family lunch on a Sunday, but not with spaghetti with pomodoro, things done a bit sort of more luxuriously, lasagna and things like that.
Yeah. Well, my whole point, as you know, is that I am on a mission to try and figure out, by listening to the stakeholders, listening to tour guides, listening to hotel owners, what is it that we can do coming back to create a new kind of tourism that actually works with the city, that's not like a parasite, but is actually something that is symbiotic, that really, because Florence needs tourism. That's the thing, is that you can't say, oh, we don't, tourism is bad, no tourism, please. This shows that you need the tourism, you really do, but there has to be a better way to do it, right?
Because I think the first book on Florence, on tourists, was written in the 1500s. Because I've had people say to me, don't you get tired of people going through your city? And I said, ma'am, we've always had people going through a city. We were on the main pilgrim road down to Rome, or to go, we were near sort of Pisa. You've got the pilgrim roads, you've got the Francigena, which of course people are walking again. That's fascinating.
Yep.
I had a friend who walked it, a friend in England. It took him 93 days from London to Rome, and he wrote a book about it.
Wow.
Or Like a Pilgrim, Like a Tramp. And was very, very, very funny about it, and very deeply, I think, religious in certain parts. And Harry must be now, he did it when he was about 48, so he must now be about 54, 55. But he's been in the Guards in England, and he worked in Iraq and places like that. So he's no shrinking violet.
Well, that's one of my little fantasies too, is to walk the Via Francigena, but that's an ambitious project.
Do it. Let's get a group to do it. I'll do it with you.
Would you really? Oh, that would be so cool. Okay, I would be. I've always wanted to do that. Yeah, I actually filmed a little sort of travel show with my friend Roberto, which we're going to premiere next month. And it a piece of it was we followed the Via Francigena for a few hours.
We went to San Miniato al Tedesco, where actually Napoleon Bonaparte had an uncle who was there. But there are monasteries, there are places along the way where you can stay. And this has brought back to life villages which were dying out.
It's popular too. I mean, the day that I was out there in the summer, I mean, this was during lockdown kind of time, so there were no American tourists for sure, but just in the time that we were standing there filming, we saw groups, like probably 6 or 7 groups of people walking it. I was really surprised by how many people do that now.
Summer is not the time to do it because it's too hot, you get very dehydrated. And that is one thing Harry said in his ruck. Every morning he had 2 very big bottles. They must have been about 2 liter, I suppose. Mm-hmm. He said the first thing you do is fill your bottles, and you make sure your water bottles are always filled. And even if you've drunk only a little bit, when you find water, you fill them up.
Yeah.
But we could do that, and on the bits maybe we're on summer on main roads, which are not very safe, you could have a van which would pick people up and take them down to where we can walk safely.
Oh, this is a cool idea. I've always wanted to do this. So yeah, let's keep the conversation going about this.
Because
oh, good. I was just going to say, we have gone over an hour because I just love talking to you.
Have we really? Oh my gosh.
Well, and this always happens. Like every time that, like after we're done with a tour and we go for coffee, it's like 3 hours later, we're like, what happened?
The trouble is you and I have got Irish blood, and it's the gift of the gab, as they say.
I know. It's like the Northern Irish, you talk to each other and you just can't stop. So it is.
Well, we haven't kissed the Blarney Stone actually, physically, but there must be something in our blood.
I actually have. I kissed the Blarney Stone when I was 10 years old, and it was the scariest thing I've ever done because you have to lean backwards, and it's really scary. Yeah. Well, maybe as an adult, it wouldn't be.
Assolutamente no.
No. Well, I want to thank you so much for chatting with me today. This has been lovely, and I'm definitely going to want to have you back at some point for more chatting. But those of you who are watching, again, like I said, we're just kind of today announcing that we're going to be doing a week-long Florence tour, and Antonia is going to be helping me with that to organize it. I'm going out to Prato one day, getting to know the city kind of in depth and in the way that we think that people should see Florence, not in a rush. So hopefully we'll get that out there, and we'll have more information within the next couple of weeks about dates for that. But lovely.
Perfect.
Yeah, lovely to see you as always, Antonia. Oh, and the other thing, Antonia, and I wanted to tell you, if you don't mind me telling people, Antonia, is we came up with an interesting idea, which we're going to work on. She is the person I learned from. So if you think that I know stuff, where do I get the things I know? I get them from somebody like her. So I thought it would be neat to be able to bring her directly to you as a way to learn. So we're going to try to work on maybe a series of lectures that she can offer if you would like to learn about Florentine history. We have a few different ideas. So just stay tuned. She and I are going to work on this together, and it'll be probably a lecture series. What do you think? Are we still on for that, Antonia?
Absolutely. And I think I've got quite a lot of studying to do, but I think sort of from mid-April onwards, because I've got various things going on in my life at the moment. And also I really want to be able to sit down, make my notes, talk about what I want to talk about. We'll work that one out. You know, on things, as I said, rather like maybe charity during the Middle Ages.
Yeah. So
when we immigrants coming in here, you know, and the people who came on, people going through, or food. After all, you were talking about Palazzo d'Avanzati. I've actually got their cookery book.
Oh, I didn't know they had a cookbook.
Oh, and how?
Oh, cool. Wow.
Because about crayfish, because people grew crayfish in ponds. That's another thing. Have you ever been to Villa Gamberai at Settignano?
I've always wanted to go, but I haven't, no.
Well, we'll go together.
All right.
And it was Villa Gamberai because gambero is a crayfish, and they had the crayfish ponds up there, hence the name.
All right. Well, we have a lot of plans, but we're going to start right now with virtual plans. So stay tuned, everybody. If you would like to learn from Antonia, we're going to set up a series of lectures with her that I'm going to host. So more information as soon as she and I work that out, but hopefully starting probably late April or early May, right?
I would, yes, because I do really want to get my act together and, work out the lectures, and we'll work together of how long and on what and so on.
Exactly. So, well, it has been such a pleasure. And, I always love talking to you. So I'm sure you and I will talk again very soon. But thank you for chatting with us today. I really appreciate it.
Knowing you and I. Thank you so much, Sarah. It's been great. Goodbye to everybody. Thank you very much for your kind attention. And I sincerely hope to meet you all with Sarah here in my beautiful city of Florence.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, thank you so much. So tomorrow, everybody, just a little programming note. We are switching things around because we are in Italy and things don't always go the way you plan. So we're not doing the food tour tomorrow. We're going to do that on Wednesday. And tomorrow, I'll have a note up later about what our programming is going to be. My guest tomorrow is going to be Rose Major from Art Viva. So stay tuned about what that's going to be and the timing. Otherwise, thank you again. Grazie. Ciao.
Ciao, ciao. Grazie mille.